It's been a few weeks since the Toronto Maple Leafs moved on from Kyle Dubas, but what it did was split Leafs Nation into Dubasites and Shanaplanners. So, after a couple of weeks of taking in all the information, looking at everything that's been said about what's going on and the new positions that Kyle Dubas has taken and Brad Treliving filling in Toronto as general manager, we decided it was time to look into the real reason that Kyle Dubas was fired by the Toronto Maple Leafs. What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. I'm the host, Zack Phillips. If you have not already subscribed here to the Leafs Digest channel, I urge you to do so. Please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and as you hear things throughout here that you agree with, disagree with, if you find out things that you didn't know before, make sure to let us know in the comments section. I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about how they feel about how the entire situation went down, if they're picking sides or if they just don't care and they're just fans of the Maple Leafs. Let us know in the comments below. But as I had mentioned, yes, we are now into a different or maybe a slightly adjusted era of Toronto Maple Leafs hockey here with this team, as we've now advanced on from Lou Lamoriello to Kyle Dubas and now back into the Brad Treliving older hockey type era of this Maple Leafs team, where we may look at a different build. But when the initial news was announced, we basically saw a situation where there was strong reaction one way or another. People freaking out about what happened with Kyle Dubas, people freaking out in support of Brendan Shanahan, and it kind of created this massive divide amongst Leafs fans that saw headbutting nonstop, even to the extent of media, where we saw traditionally neutral media outlets giving their opinions on things and just being lambasted online for their thoughts and their feelings. And then we seen writers coming out of the woodwork as very clear Dubas talking heads in support of him. And no one really got the true story of what happened. Well, now here we are a couple of weeks later, so I wanted to go through the timeline of events, everything that happened, why it seems like Dubas may have been fired, because it kind of feels like we haven't really got to a point where things have been pieced back together. So with that being said, we'll talk about the timeline, what happened, and the Brad Treliving hire, and whether or not this is a good thing for the Maple Leafs. So let's start with the timeline, the Dubas-Shanahan contract timeline. All right, first things first. This dates back, as far as we know, to the trade deadline, where Brendan Shanahan and MLSE had offered Kyle Dubas a contract. This was obviously not accepted by Dubas. He left it up in the air, wanted to see how things going, presumably believed in himself and his ability to get this team further and further into the playoffs, thinking, hey, if I can do that, I might be able to put myself in a position of more money, more term, more whatever it was. Well, ultimately, he decides to wait out. At this same time, I just want to throw this out there to people. This is around the time when rumors start circulating that Pittsburgh is interested in replacing their entire staff with Kyle Dubas and his guys, if he would like to do so and jump ship and go to the Penguins. So these are the rumors coming out around that time, and people suggesting strongly Dubas is off to Pittsburgh. That's around the trade deadline. Let's look ahead now. The team wins its first playoff series in 19 seasons. They move on to face the Florida Panthers in round 2 after defeating the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6 games, and they ultimately go on to lose to the Florida Panthers here. They lose in 5 games, and it was pretty embarrassing the way that things went down. Your core four didn't show up. We kind of came to the conclusion that they lost the same way that they do every single year. You had to go to your backup or your third string goalie, and essentially in what was Joseph Woll. It wasn't a pretty sight. And a lot of the things that Dubas had done and the things that he had built here, the flaws year after year after year, kind of came to fruition yet again. That being said, he did get them out of the first round, and ultimately it felt more and more like the problem here more than anything else was that the core four didn't show up, and they were the ones that let the Leafs, the management, and the fans down. But it is what it is. They get out of a playoff round. Now, you go into the end of season cleanup. This is where things start to get interesting and where we have to follow the timeline a little bit closely. So, for starters, let's look at Sunday before the locker cleanout, May 14th. Brendan Shanahan sits down with Kyle Dubas and offers him a new contract. At this point in time, Dubas decides he still isn't going to accept it. He's got to take some time to think. The two of them sit down. They discuss how difficult the season has been to go through, the hate that they may have had to deal with online, assuming both of them have to deal with this. But Kyle Dubas took it personally. He had a tough time with it. Blah, blah, blah. He explains this to Shanahan. They sit down. That's all fine. No issues there, but he says he's just gonna wait, not gonna accept the deal yet. Now, Monday, locker cleanout, May 15th. Kyle Dubas sits down in front of the media and tells the entire hockey world in this moment he is unsure of his future as a general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, but it's not just that. He's not just sure of his future of the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's unsure of his future in general. He convinces everyone that he needs some time for his family, some time for mental health, and if he's not going to be the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, he's not going to be the GM anywhere else. This is what he tells everyone. This is a pretty shocking revelation to the public. Now, clearly he had some type of conversation with Shanahan the day before, just explaining how difficult things were. But that in of itself was shocking to Shanahan to hear him feeling the way that he did. But not only that, it was shocking to hear that Dubas would go out and publicly say that to everyone and put that all on the table. So that is the Monday of locker cleanout. Now, things go quiet. Tuesday, we hear nothing. Wednesday, we hear nothing. We didn't hear anything publicly as Leafs fans or as hockey fans on Thursday, but when Friday came around, this is what was clarified. So Thursday night, this would be May 18th, Kyle Dubas sends an email. Yes, that is correct. An email to his boss, Brendan Shanahan. The man who stuck his neck on the line, gave him an opportunity in the NHL, advanced him past Lou Lamoriello and moved on from Lou Lamoriello to bring Kyle up as the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, defended him publicly year after year after year, despite a lack of success in this Maple Leafs team in the playoffs. Brendan Shanahan went out there and defended Kyle Dubas, defended his moves, defended his signings, and defended him despite the team not winning. And Dubas turns around and sends Shanahan an email. He can't call him. He can't ask to meet. He sends him an email and says, I want to come back as the GM. Now, okay, you don't have a problem with them sending an email. That's fine. He sends the email. Maybe in your world, or if you're listening and you're sitting here saying, that's fine, I don't see an issue there. I don't necessarily have a full problem with that either. But what it is immediately followed up with is a new proposed contract from Kyle's agent. This new contract has a lot more money and presumably more term involved in it. So, Shanahan has just heard that Dubas goes into the media, tells everyone he doesn't even know if he wants to be a GM anymore, and follows it up 3 days later after radio silence with an email saying he wants to come back and a new contract proposal for more money. This is how this was handled by Dubas and his agent. That is Thursday, May 18th. Now, let's get to Friday, May 19th. Brendan Shanahan goes into the MLSE building and informs Kyle Dubas he is no longer the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. From that point, Shanahan goes into the media, goes up on stage, and tells everyone every single detail of everything that happened over the last week. This is basically the timeline of events that leads to Dubas being let go. Now, the final piece of the timeline here, Wednesday morning, May 31st, Kyle Dubas announced as president of hockey operations with the Pittsburgh Penguins, a $40 million contract for 7 years. And at the same time, Brad Treliving is announced as the general manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the final domino in the entire timeline to tip over. So we've dug into the timeline. Let's dig into a little bit more of what happened here. What went down and why was Kyle Dubas fired by the Toronto Maple Leafs and Brendan Shanahan Obviously, a lot of this is going to have to be speculation. That is just naturally what it is, because I'm not the one sitting there talking to Kyle Dubas. I'm not the one sitting there talking to his agent, but ultimately it would appear as this. Kyle Dubas overplayed his hand, and he lied about the family problem. He lied about the mental health. And essentially what he was doing is try to use them and try to use that soft point to play to the market and play to the media and play to the public to gain leverage over the Toronto Maple Leafs and turn it around and basically say, hey, you're going to pay me more money because it's so difficult to be here and it's so hard on my mentals and it's so hard on this. Well, guess what, Kyle? That's not how the real world works. Effectively, you don't get paid just for emotional toll of a job. This is the NHL. It has been this way for over 100 years now. And if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. I'm sorry. I do strongly feel that mental health is important and handling these things is important. But more and more pieces come together to ultimately lead you to believe that this was a lie. And the first piece that I look to is a point by his man himself, James Myrtle, the biggest Kyle Dubas defender that you'll see out there, writing for legitimate companies that put out articles and put out pieces of content. James Myrtle himself has this to say. We'll never know for sure, but more and more people you talk to around the league believe Dubas had at least some inkling the Penguins seriously wanted him when he went into those failed odd negotiations with Shanahan last month, which puts what happened in a different light. There you go. Even Dubas's biggest defenders had to come out and say, ooh, maybe he actually did know about this contract ahead of him going into these negotiations. Maybe this wasn't actually truly him finding out after the fact that he had an opportunity with Pittsburgh. And then you kind of look at the contract that he signed, $40 million, approximately 7 years on the deal, president of hockey ops in Pittsburgh. And you see a tweet like this from Edna Garrett on Twitter at WatchMyReview saying, so Dubas got $40 million as president. He had to have known about that deal when he asked for more money. Ultimately, what it's starting to feel like, especially listening to Toronto media outlets like Overdrive here on TSN or reading articles in The Athletic, seeing popular Twitter accounts that follow the Leafs and track everything going on there, it is becoming more and more clear throughout this entire process that a few things were likely to have happened here. Dubas knew about the offers in Pittsburgh. He knew about the job availability. He knew about their interest, and he knew about how much money they were willing to offer him. Now, we all know that tampering in the NHL is a thing. It is a thing in the NBA, NFL, MLB, the NHL. It is unavoidable. It happens. If you have an agent, which Dubas clearly does, it makes this whole thing a whole lot more likely that this is how it could have played out. If Dubas's agent could be going around and talking to teams while Dubas is sitting there talking to Shanahan, it makes it a whole lot more quiet and it makes it a whole lot more mysterious in the background and kind of swept under the rug. Now, as things advance here, it starts to feel more and more like what happened in that week from the Monday is not that Shanahan's ego got in the way, but instead what happened here is that Dubas and his agent knew that they had a position in Pittsburgh as the president of hockey operations. Dubas turned around and tried to kick Shanahan out of his own job, take over Shanahan's job, take all the money from MLSE, get the big contract, get the power, get the autonomy, and remove Brendan Shanahan from his own position. He tried to backstab the man who stuck his neck out on the line for him for 9 years. 9 years in Toronto, Brendan Shanahan went out of his way to give Kyle Dubas an opportunity in the NHL, give him this experience, and then ultimately promote him and defend him. And Kyle Dubas turned around and stabbed him in the back by finding an opportunity with the Pittsburgh Penguins, knowing that he had that cushion sitting there waiting for him with $40 million and the title of president of hockey operations. And then he tried to cut the legs of the man who gave him the opportunity. So you want to talk about loyalty out there, and the Leafs weren't loyal to him, and the Leafs and blah, blah. It is becoming more and more clear here that the one who lacked loyalty in all of this was Kyle Dubas. And for those forgetting about what happened when Kyle was actually promoted to general manager, he was essentially a foot out the door on his way to Colorado to take that general manager position, to strong arm the Leafs and say, if you don't want to lose me, you're going to make me GM here. And they kind of bent their knee and gave him that opportunity. So now twice he tried to play this card. Twice he tried to do this to the Leafs, and this time the Leafs said, no. We're not going to deal with this. We're not going to conform to every need. If he wanted more money, if he needed more money, they were willing to do that. Shanahan said it wasn't about money. They would have given him more money, but it was about the entire way that Dubas handled this situation. This was an all-time bag fumble by Kyle Dubas, where it became more and more abundant that Kyle Dubas was so incompetent with his own contract negotiations that he was maybe just as bad at negotiating his own contract, if not worse, than he was at negotiating the contracts for the core four of the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. And they said, you know what? We're seeing a problem here. We're not going to do it. So at the end of the day, there was no ego for the MLSE or for Brendan Shanahan here. They decided they didn't want to be stabbed in the back by the man that they gave trust to, they gave loyalty to, and they gave an opportunity to here in Toronto when he went out of his way to try to take his job, his boss's job, and kick him out of his role because he wanted more. He got a little bit greedy, whether it was for power, money, security, whatever it was. He went out of his way and he mishandled his own situation, ultimately costing him his job with the Toronto Maple Leafs. It is what it is. That is kind of how that played out, and this seems to be more and more likely the real reason that Kyle Dubas was fired by the Toronto Maple Leafs. But we do get a replacement in here. His name is Brad Treliving. So let's talk a little bit about Brad Treliving. Who is Treliving, and is he the right guy? Look, ultimately, I will say this. We're not going to know until we see this team start next season, but I do think that he is. One thing that I've felt strongly about with this Leafs team is that they have lacked that defensive power. And one thing Brad Treliving has been very good at when he was in Calgary was identifying defensemen, whether they were free agents, whether they were trade targets, or whether they were guys that he was going to draft. Look at their current defense right now. Zadorov, Tanev, Uyghur, Anderson, Shillington, Hanifin. These are all guys that he brought into the team by either draft, signings, or trades. And that is a very, very, very strong decor and should not be overlooked. I strongly believe that he's going to come in here and revamp this team's D for what we're seeing. He's the one who moved on from Brody and Gio. And yeah, they gave us a year or 2 good years of play. But when you look at the guys that he's got in Calgary, each of those guys that he has there has given him much more than that. He was bringing in guys who were not at the end of their prime, not a year left of good hockey, a year and a half left of good hockey. He brought guys in who are ready to give him good hockey right away and for an extended period of time. So I think we're going to see a revamped decor. Look, another thing that I see here a lot is people ragging on some big trades that he had made, and one specifically, Matthew Tkachuk. Look, you can sit there and complain about it all you want and say, well, he made this trade, it was terrible. Guess what? First and foremost, he was strong-armed. It had nothing to do with him. Tkachuk himself said he considers Treliving like family. Treliving said he considers Tkachuk like a son. They had a very, very good, strong relationship, but ultimately what it came down to was that Tkachuk looked and said, I don't want to live in Calgary. I do not want to live in Calgary. That is a much different market appeal than the Toronto Maple Leafs in terms of branding, money, weather, city, all of that kind of stuff. Very different than what Treliving has access to in Toronto. Also, by the way, the resources that Calgary has to offer, arena, staff, medical teams, sports science, nutrition, all much better than what Calgary has to offer. Tkachuk didn't want to be in Calgary. Treliving ended up in a spot where he was basically put in handcuffs and told to make a move, backed into a corner. And as much as people want to sit there and rag on it because Calgary didn't make the playoffs and the Florida Panthers are in the Stanley Cup Finals, I really, really do not think that that was a bad move. In fact, you know what? I think it was an excellent move because he got back Mackenzie Weegar. He got back a winger who was capable of putting up 110 points. And on top of that, he moved on from a guy that he was not going to be able to re-sign. He got back 2 excellent pieces for a guy that he could not bring back. Huberdeau had a really bad season last year. He's not going to have that season again next year. You think he's going to be a 50-point guy again? No shot. I genuinely believe Jonathan Huberdeau launches back to be the 80, 85, 90-point guy that he's capable of being. Mackenzie Weegar is a legitimate stud defenseman. He went to the World Hockey Championships and won defenseman of the tournament. This guy is a legit defenseman in the NHL. He made a good move. And by the way, the Calgary Flames finished with more points in the regular season than the Florida Panthers did. It just so happened that the West required more points to get into the playoffs than the East did. And on top of that, the Calgary Flames lost the most games in overtimes and shootouts of any team in the NHL. All they had to do was win 2 more of those games that they were in, and it turns into them going into the playoffs. It happens. You also don't expect Markstrom to have all of a sudden an 8.95 save percentage. He turned into a pumpkin for a year. Guys, these things happen. The Calgary Flames will be much better next season, and I don't think we should be basing last year in terms of who Treliving is and what he will be with the Maple Leafs. So I'm willing to give him a shot. I think he's going to be good here. I'm expecting some good things out of Treliving. I expect a different looking decor. And on top of that, he's friends with Matthews' agent. I'm not worried. If you guys are in love with Kyle Dubas, I understand. I think he did some good things while he was here, but let's not sit here and pretend he's the greatest general manager of all time. He's not. He got handed a team that had 105 points and maxed them out with 6 points more in a regular season. He won 1 playoff round and he won 1 game in the second round. It's not like this guy took them to cup finals or won cup finals and they gave up on him. They didn't. He overplayed his hand. They offered him contracts. He wasn't willing to accept it. He struggled with the negotiation. He lost his position in Toronto. It happens. Leafs fans, it's time to move on. I'm not worried. I think Treliving is going to be a good GM here in Toronto. I'm excited to see the moves he makes at the draft. I'm excited to see the free agency moves that he makes and who we pick up. But all in all, I think it is an exciting time to be a Leafs fan. So if you guys are with me, make sure to subscribe here on the Leafs Digest channel. Like this video as well. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the entire situation, your thoughts on the timeline, your thoughts on what Dubas had to do, whose side you are taking, or if you're with me and you're just a fan of the Maple Leafs and you don't really care who the GM is because you just want to see the team have success. And as long as the guy can do that, you're going to be fine with it. But guys, I'm not panicked. It's all over with. Let's move forward. Leafs fans, look forward to seeing you guys here for more videos, reactions, breakdowns, rumors, all that kind of stuff here on this channel. Make sure to subscribe and keep believing.